Today on Why I'm Playing, we're going to be talking about why I've been playing Saber Interactive's just released World War Z, a third-person, four-player co-op zombie survival game. It's available on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC via the Epic Game Store, and it'll run you $40 USD. World War Z sets itself up like a Left4Dead game. Yes, it's third-person, but it isn't shy about its Left4Dead inspirations. That being said, it does a good job of going beyond just being a Left4Dead clone and actually being a game that stands on its own with some really interesting design decisions, specifically around how it handles its zombie or Zeke hordes. For $40, you get a really good four-player co-op zombie adventure that I've found to be so far highly replayable and immensely satisfying. We're going to talk about a decent chunk of that today, focusing primarily on what it's like to play World War Z, sort of the atmosphere and the gameplay presentation that has hooked me so much over the last few days. Now, let's get those Left4Dead inspirations out of the way. Yes, this is a four-player co-op game. It runs across multiple episodes and multiple locations that feature their own band of survivors. In a lot of ways, World War Z elevates what Left4Dead did here by making sure that each location, New York City, Jerusalem, Moscow, and Tokyo, have their own cast of survivors. They're diverse individuals from different walks of life and different backgrounds. And I love that. You're playing through someone's little micro story, the events that happen for them in each of these locations during the events of this zombie apocalypse. And when you level up one of those characters, you actually gain access to a little animated short in addition to the bio that's already available for them. It's a nice way of expanding the storytelling and the individuals you're playing as, giving them some character beyond the small quips you hear them speak during actual gameplay. I totally dig it, and I'm really glad they did it. This game also has some special zombies: the lurker, the bull, and a screamer and a gas bag. Again, a lot of them very similar to the formula set in stone, for the most part it seems, by Turtle Rock when they were at Valve way back when, working on the original Left4Dead. I'm glad though they kind of limited it to those few special zombies. They play actually really well into the more horde-focused nature of World War Z. I particularly like the Screamer, a zombie that has a microphone sort of hardwired into its body, so every time it screams, it's doing so very loudly, and it will actually call in additional small waves during the many little defense or objective segments that make up World War Z's missions. Taking these guys out is really important. On lower difficulties, they cause a bit of a ruckus, and they can actually be pretty devastating. And as you get into the higher difficulties, you don't want these guys screaming for minutes at a time. They're going to make your life very, very difficult. I like what they've done there. But again, I'm glad that they're not as frequent and as deadly as they were in Left4Dead, because the hordes are what matter here for me personally. And this is where World War Z gets kind of crazy, kind of terrifying, really satisfying, and also really cool. If you've seen the film, which is much like the game, nothing like the book, giant hordes of Zeeks create pyramids so they can scale walls to get access to the juicy living flesh that hides inside. They do the same thing in this game, and these make up a huge part of the game's like survival, escape segments, and defensive segments. The pyramid system is even a part of the game's gameplay system in that you can cut down the bottom of the pyramid to cause it to collapse. This is the #1 way you're going to deal with these massive swarms of zombies, and the game does an incredible job of empowering the player here. They put you in a position where you feel like, we're totally fucked, man. There's no way we're going to survive this. But thanks to some good positioning on the part of the survivors and this pyramid collapse feature, you can overcome some incredible odds, and that makes for a very satisfying survival experience where you're always on the brink of death and failure, because if you don't collapse those pyramids, by the way, things are going to get real bad real quick. You're going to get overwhelmed. There's a pinning system in this game, so when a certain number of zombies surround you, you'll be pinned by them. The game just kind of always straddles this really fine line between we're actually doing it and we're totally going to die, and that makes for a really satisfying gameplay experience. Now, those hordes, they exist in multiple portions of a mission. Missions are kind of broken up. You'll transition from just moving from point A to point B to defending point C and then escaping out point D. The one thing that remains true, though, through all of your missions in World War Z is that you're never looking to just like kill all zombies. This is very much a game about escaping and surviving. So if at any point you find that your team is just standing around shooting zombies without any clear objective, chances are you're supposed to be just getting the hell away. The game is always telling you to either hold an objective so you can gain access to a new escape route, so you can complete an objective that will give you access to the next escape route, or it's telling you to haul ass to the next location. So killing zombies in this game is just a means of surviving and getting by. It's not about killing them all. It's not about clearing a building of zombies. And the game drives that point home thematically really well by ensuring that you're always seeing hundreds and thousands of zombies in the background that sort of make up the swarms that you're going to be receiving. It's a really cool effect. It's a really cool thing atmospherically, and it works really well gameplay-wise because it pushes this heavy sense of, tension and urgency on the player to complete whatever objective they have or to survive whatever it is they need to survive so they can open that door and get to wherever it is they need to go. This also plays a little bit into the game's like sort of stealth mechanic in that plenty of instances in the game will allow you to take out a group of zombies as quiet as you can for as long as you can to prevent from triggering a horde earlier than you needed a horde to trigger. It's an interesting way of just, again, driving up the tension factor of the game and kind of punishing the player if they decide to just be noisy all of the time by giving them hordes in positions where they didn't otherwise need to face a horde. Again, this like whole portion of the game is the strongest point for me. Like the little defense segments are cool. You can get little turrets that you can pick up in the environment to put down. You get mortars you can put down. It's just where all of like the cinematic over-the-topness of the game comes into play, but it's also where like the best survival moments of the game are. And I love the idea of a zombie survival game where I'm not like considering how I'm going to cut down all of the zombies in this one area before I move on to the next area, but instead just asking myself how my team can move most efficiently through this horde to get to wherever it is we need to be. And a lot of those like escape moments in the game are just loaded with some crazy over-the-top stuff. One of my favorites, hands down, is in the New York City location where you're making your way out of the storm drain, like sort of up, back out into the streets, if you will, fighting your way through these subway stations, these sewer-type environments, and the Zeke are just jumping in from above. It's literally raining Zeke. They're pouring out of storm drains like waterfalls into piles and then getting up and rushing you. It is part humor and comedy in that you're like laughing at the absurdness of it, but then the other half is just raw terror of like, oh my lord, that's so many zombies. Like, they are gonna kill us. We need to just like cut our way through them and let's just go, 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 go. And that all actually ties really well into the game's weapon system. So you've got like your basic starting weapons, your secondary weapons. Weapons can be found in the environment a la Left4Dead, but you also get heavy weapons that are sort of one and done. So you use whatever they have in their magazine, in their tube, in their clip, whatever it might be, and then you just drop them. So those are the guns you might use in a situation like that where you're pushing through this huge horde, getting from point A to point B, cut them down with that auto shotgun with that ridiculous magazine, and then just get the hell out of Dodge. The game, I think, has done a really good job of considering like what it wants to be and how it wants to function and keeping it all relatively simple. And that's probably the best for a team like Saber, who was most likely contracted by someone to create a game like this with not a huge budget and not a lot of time. But I think all of that, everything they've taken into consideration, the idea of like, let's just follow the Left 4 Dead formula, but put a little bit of a spin on it using the hordes we saw in the films, that's what's made this game work as well as it's worked. Like, it all just functions. And even though it's got some jank, it's got a bit of weirdness, it's not like a super ultra polished AAA title. For what it has, it is actually pretty polished, The game also looks really stunning. All the footage you're seeing today is on the Xbox One X. It runs at what seems to be like a nice solid 30 frames per second. It looks good. It's got some bugs and glitches there. But all in all, it's a really satisfying game to play. And I think at the end of the day, it all ties back in to those hordes, to those swarms. Like the presentation factor, the atmosphere of the game. There's lots of little bits and bobs in the game in terms of gameplay design. But I think without that, without the massive hordes, it would feel like a really straightforward Left 4 Dead clone. And it wouldn't be as good as it is. As you make your way through the higher difficulty levels available in the game, so like easy, normal, hard, there's one other one, and then there's insane, I can't remember them all, things can actually start to get really, really crazy. And the game goes from like this sort of more casual, laid-back, shoot Zeke's thing to this really focused co-op experience where playing with friends and really coordinating what you're doing and how you're doing it is going to be 100% necessary to surviving and making your way through here. The game also uses a friendly fire mechanic, which again I think plays really well into the idea of having to like control these choke points and these massive hordes of Zeeks, is that you can't just kind of like run out in the open and everybody strafes around and shoots things. You really have to consider who's holding what side of a hallway, who's going to crouch maybe while another person shoots over the top of them. This is where playing with randoms can become kind of frustrating. This is where solo play with the AI, which isn't really good, becomes frustrating. But in 4-player co-op, the idea of that friendly fire difficulty option, the idea that as you play on higher difficulties, friendly fire does more damage, adds a really cool layer to the game, where you're not just surviving against the Zeke hordes, you're surviving against yourself as survivors and your ability to coordinate and communicate with one another as actual players in the real world. And that adds a really intense co-op element to the game that I think just does a lot. Like, that's cool, like the game doesn't just get harder because the zombies, there's more of them and they kill you more quickly. It's like, no, how are you going to manage as a squad now? We're asking a lot more of you. You can't accidentally shoot your friend in the back of the head with that shotgun with 2 shots because you're going to kill him in a moment when you really needed him the most. So there's a lot of good stuff happening with World War Z. I'm not entirely done with the campaign yet, but I have actually gone back and played through the first 2 locations, Jerusalem and New York City, 3 times now, because I wanted to see kind of how the game felt from a replay factor. Is it enjoyable to just replay through one mission in the game 3 or 4 times, even if I'm not really altering my difficulty level? And the answer that I came away with after about 10 hours with this game was yes. I actually really enjoyed New York City and Jerusalem. In fact, the more I played them, the more I started to appreciate the sort of horde segments of their design. Well, I'm not like a huge fan of a lot of the little objective collection type segments you have where it's like, get these keys to do this. The zombie hordes always spice those up, and the horde segments themselves are always really satisfying because the horde does seem to function a little bit differently on every single playthrough. Not to mention the different classes you might be running and the different players you might have on your team are also going to affect like sort of the outcome in your squad's survival performance, if you will, during those big horde push moments. And the game also has a really solid progression system. So this is another thing that adds to that level of replayability in World War Z. You have up to 6 classes in the game. Each class has its own trees that can be unlocked and its own core perks that can be unlocked. These trees have 3 perks for each column, and you can unlock them in like any order once you've acquired the necessary level to gain access to them using the game's currency system, in-game currency system, and then you kind of have to pick the perk that you want active. So you can kind of make builds across the individual classes. The long run idea here is that the core perks make you more powerful based on the role that that class is supposed to play into. The same thing goes for weapons. So the more you use a weapon in the game, you're going to access additional variants of it that have attachments that improve its performance in different ways. You can go down like 2 trees for each of the weapons. You can have like maybe a suppressor focused one that's for close quarters. Maybe you've got something that's also suppressed, but it's focused on more long range engagements. So everything kind of has like a little tree you can spec into. And while none of that stuff seems like it has a huge effect on the earlier levels of the game in the easier difficulties, you can see how it could start to scale up as you get into the harder difficulties and you start to actually coordinate with a group of friends who are looking to actually offer some sort of a symbiotic relationship with one another. Somebody's constantly putting down explosive rounds, another person's running medic and making sure that they stim people who get caught out in bad situations. Maybe they get tackled by a bull. You can really see how the co-op experience here is strong to start, but is only going to get stronger. And I think that, again, lends itself to the replayability of the World War Z experience. And to take things to the next level, one step further, the dev team has said that they're going to be announcing a roadmap for this game in the very near future. This is one of those games, as I was playing it, I was like, man, I just kind of hope there's more of it. Like, this is a really fun game. Like, this is, in a lot of ways, the Left4Dead we've been looking for. This will not just hold me over, but provide me with an experience that I didn't expect to get at a quality level and a fun factor level that I also didn't expect to get, and I hope they do a lot more of it. So I'm really excited for the roadmap. I'm definitely going to be talking more about this game. In fact, as it seems so many people are playing it, I'm starting to put together a little new player's guide to help new players deal with the friendly fire system and get an understanding for some of the core classes that I recommend. I just think there's actually a lot of fun stuff to talk about with this game. So I'm going to throw out like a guide or two, and we'll do another discussion down the line when the team talks about the roadmap. I'd like to know where World War Z goes. I think it's a game that is worthy of going someplace else. The team has done a really amazing job here, and I love that a more contract-focused developer like Saber is getting the opportunity to not just work on like multiplayer projects with other developers, but to go out and make their own really cool thing. You should totally check it out, give it a shot, especially if you're looking for something to jam on with a group of friends. This game excels in 4-player co-op. I didn't spend any time today talking about the game's PvP component. While I think it's doing cool things, I don't think it functions that well overall, and I didn't find the core shooting mechanics in World War Z to be satisfying enough to put me in a position where it's something I don't want to spend my time on. It does exist, and maybe I'll talk about it in the future, but in my opinion, World War Z is worth the $40 and then some for the co-op campaign experience that is available right now, right here at launch, even with the multiplayer thrown to the side. If you have any other questions for me, thoughts of your own on World War Z, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Earthlings, step forward. You have been brought here for a purpose, the most important task of your life.